Welcome to Good Game, your no BS insights for crypto founders.
Jupiter is the clearest example that shows real financial benefit to consumers from composability. I would say Jupiter is like the perfect example of that. Is because they will always pick you the best route regardless. And it's taking as many markets and aggregate and accounting for all the fees and everything else, minimizing the cost for the user in every transaction.
Looking for your next startup idea in crypto? Check out our request for startups list and get inspired at alliance.xyz/ideas. Welcome to Good Game. Today we're going to have Ming from Jupiter, the founder of Jupiter, and Anatoly, founder of Solana, come speak to us about why Solana is one of the best layer ones to use to build high-end apps like Jupiter. So I'm pretty excited to talk to them. I really want to dive deep into the infrastructure of what enables Jupiter to be a world-class product, and then more or less diving deeper into what Jupiter is bringing to the table today and what they're going to bring into the future and some of the new products they're releasing. What are you excited about, Qiao?
Obviously, our audience knows Solana and Anatoly, but Ming might be a little bit more under the radar. For those who don't know, Jupiter is the leading DEX aggregator on Solana with a market share of over 80%. That is absolutely crazy. And that is compared to the underlying DEX of Orca, Radium, etc. So 80% of retail flow goes to Jupiter rather than the underlying DEXs. Recently, Jupiter also launched a perpetual swap protocol competing with Drift. I think last time I checked, their number in terms of volume in dollar amount has surpassed Drift as well. And of course, everyone on Twitter is talking about the JUP token airdrop. So they're doing that too pretty soon to reward the early participants. Imran and I have known Ming for at least 3 years.
You know how we met them? You know how we met Ming? Here's a good story.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kyber Network was part of Alliance's first batch.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Loy and Ming that joined our program. We worked very closely with both of them to help source liquidity, help them with their V2. You know, this goes deep for us.
My very first mentorship session at Alliance in batch 1 was with Ming from Kyber. And I remember we were talking about regulatory challenges. Back then it was in DeFi around Kyber, etc. But we've known Ming for a very long time. Obviously, Kyber originally, or still is on Ethereum. So Ming is one of the very few founders that started on Ethereum and then moved to Solana. And we'll talk to him about why ultimately he thinks Solana is the right place to build.
Obviously, we want to talk to Anatoly about some of the cool things that are coming out, such as like localized fee markets and why that's going to be very different than the way fees are currently generated on Ethereum, because you could think of layer 2s as like localized fee markets, right? And that's kind of the way they're scaling. Whereas with Solana, they're scaling via their layer 1 and the hardware requirements. So it's going to be very cool to hear the pros and cons of both. All right, so let's bring on Anatoly and Ming. And so before we get started, Qiao, do you want to add any notes?
Yes. Actually, I was looking at our application data this morning. With actual data, I usually just base my conclusion off of anecdotal impressions, but now I have real data. So, by the way, this morning I tweeted about the US versus Asia, and US has been losing dominance to Asia over the last 3 years. I did the same exercise for Solana versus the other ecosystems. I'll share the actual data later, but there is a very clear trend. So there is a V shape. So last year, second half of 2022 was when FTX happened. Solana founder applications bottomed at that point. And then this year, it's been trending back up. And this is relative to Ethereum, Cosmos, Bitcoin, Polkadot, Avalanche, blah, blah, blah. So, by the way, I told Anatoly the other day that 25% of the applications we've emitted so far for the next cohort are from Solana. Nice. And that's the highest ever in our history. So Solana is coming back.
It's already back at this point, right?
It's already back.
Never left. Where are we coming back from?
Just it's so funny because I told you was right. The whole space talks about the thing being dead, right? But to us, we're just building, right?
Yeah.
So what was insane, right, is that everything you see today, all the Bitcoin developers, everything, right? All the foundations were laid in the last 1 year. No one paid attention, right? But like incredible amounts of like really good progress, like priority fees, like lookup tables, a lot of really fundamental things that fundamentally changed the whole development experience in Solana really happened, right, over the last 1 year, right? It's funny because the market just the price and the activity, right? But I think for us, I think we see the foundation, right? That has been there for like last 2 years. And Qiao was actually really good because Qiao was actually the one of the guys that were actually really constantly like supporting Solana, right?
Shilling Solana.
Not sure. You actually very supportive of everything, so really grateful for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Appreciate your recognition.
So I want to take us back in time to like around 2018. Anatoly, you and Raj first thought about Solana. And there was one thing that you mentioned over every podcast I've listened to you in was the fact that there was this idea of being able to disrupt New York Stock Exchange and Nasdaq and being able to build at the speed of light, applications at the speed of light. I've heard this over and over and over again. So I want to start with that because I feel like that's a good narrative to work backwards from to the designing of the systems in itself. Why did you choose that particular sector? And then maybe we could talk about like some of the infrastructure and technical abilities that Solana has that no other layer one has.
That's an awesome question. So this is like my science fiction dream. Like imagine finance 1,000 years from now. Like, do you still imagine like a bunch of people in buildings and all this like crufty stuff like running it? No, right? Like it's all running by computers. It's all super hyper fast. And the way I thought it could happen is that you have a single computer that does all of it, right? And like Byzantine fault tolerance allows you to actually make that a reality because that computer has to have hyper transparency and fault tolerance and just be super reliable and can never stop, but also has to be global and encompass all of the world's information. And I don't want to say decentralized because that's like a word that we made up, but like you're just think about that like 1,000 years from now financial system, right? What does that look like? So when I first kind of had this like eureka moment that there's a way to build like use kind of some of the design ideas from cellular networks and blockchain, the immediate first use case that I thought of wasn't settlement or store value in global money because I kind of thought that there were like, Ethereum is doing the settlement thing, Bitcoin is doing this, and those are not the topics that I'm even interested in. What I really cared about is like low latency, like speed of light, information flow systems. And I got kind of more interested in them throughout my career as an engineer because I was like building poorly designed trading systems on the side that were just trading on like interactive brokers and forex.com and Oanda and like all these like kind of janky like best effort brokerages for hobbyists that I felt like anytime I had like a really good algorithm, the data would arrive a little slower and my orders would get submitted a little slower. It was the most frustrating experience you could imagine. Maybe as close to what a dev feels like on Solana sometimes, but it just felt like I was getting like screwed, right, by the system. And it's impossible for me to like know for sure. And it's impossible for me to compete with folks like Jump because I'd have to give up like my firstborn and a pound of flesh to get a box in the New York Stock Exchange. So like what I thought like immediately, I don't know if we're too early, but like it seems like it's now possible using BFT plus super fast implementation of BFT to build a system that's open and fair and global and can start marching towards a technological kind of utopian end of single giant computer that's synchronized at the speed of light. And if that's possible, that system is going to be better than NYSE and all these other things. That was the idea. It's kind of a madman idea, right? But it's as crazy as when like the Google guys were like, we're going to index all of the world's information.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's an absurd dream, but like they accomplished it within 5 years, right? Like I think this might take a little longer because people don't want to give up control of finance, right? There's like a lot of careers involved there. Not librarians don't care, right? Like if they get indexed, but like a lot of political careers are wrapped up in finance. It's going to take a long time for them to kind of slowly give it up. But it's software.
I think keeping that dream alive is so important, right? And which is why I'm grateful for that because I feel
absolutely.
I feel like we have someone became very cynical, right? If I look at Bitcoin, I mean, arguing about block size and like store value, I see Ethereum arguing about like how many L2s can we spin up. I feel like it has become very cynical, right? We kind of forgot about the possibility, of crypto becoming way more than ERC20s, right? Or, yeah. So I feel like that's actually what really inspires me, right? It's like, okay, can we be way more, than what we have today, Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The physics reason why I think it can be competitive is that you have like some hyper important market moving event happens in Singapore. That data for that event, the bits that represent that happened, still have to go from Singapore to the New York Stock Exchange. They're still traveling speed of light through fiber or satellite or whatever. At the same time, in Solana 3.0, a transaction is going to fire off from a block producer that's really like effectively at Singapore, and that's going to propagate its information around the world through Turbine, fanning out across the world. And by the time it hits New York Stock Exchange, the trader that's looking at a price at NYSE and a price in a market on Solana is not going to see any arbitrage for that news event. Because by the time they see that news event, that transaction already did the price impact of that news. They already see that state transition, right, as it's being computed, right, as the block is being streamed. So there's no arb between a centralized system like NYSE and a decentralized one like Solana in this like perfect implementation. We have tons of block producers that are geographically distributed. They're all the data is propagated as fast as, switches allow. So like that end state of Solana is possible with today's technology and a bunch of blood, sweat, and tears. That's the cool part.
I just want to play devil's advocate because I want to understand what you just said. Nasdaq and NYSE, the matching of orders itself essentially happens in a single thread within a single machine, within a single co-location. But on Solana, you have nodes distributed across the world. They still need to come to consensus as to when and at what price the order needs to get matched.
There's different things there. Like you can actually have consensus happen at like these 120 millisecond checkpoint or whatever as fast as we could make it. But what matters for trading, just like it does on Nasdaq, is inclusion order, like which order gets in first. And if you have like multiple concurrent block producers all around the world that are all streaming the orders out, and you're near Singapore and you send your transaction literally to the Singapore block producer, and it encodes its transaction as soon as it receives it, right, in like very small amount of distance, very, very quickly, it's recorded right there and then. And then as it's propagating, you see that partial block being filled in New York. You see it as it's propagating, that transaction's already there. You cannot get ahead of it. When consensus fires off, it's almost guaranteed, because the only reason why consensus would fail is if there's a network partition and like the physical networks fail and there's errors and stuff there. But there's errors inside Nasdaq and NYSE. Sometimes they have to reverse trades. That happens, right? But as Solana gets more robust, as there are more nodes, it actually becomes harder and harder for rollback and forks and all that stuff to occur, because it gets more and more synchronized. Like the way Turbine works, like we add more erasure codes, the fan out gets larger, you get more information from the network.
Is that the concept behind quorum subcommittees?
No, that's a slightly different thing. Subcommittees are like a way to, it's a small optimization for us to minimize the number, like to only have a fixed number of votes per block, because more votes don't give you any more like fault tolerance. You only need like 800 or 400, just pick some number. Mm-hmm. What matters is like actually how Turbine propagates the state. And that's where we do this clever thing with erasure coding and fan out, to where the blocks are spraying around the world. But the way that the spray around the world is very much like at the same time everywhere.
Let me tackle this question from a different angle so that it's more clear for the listener. Why is it better to build a Nasdaq or NYSE on Solana versus on an Ethereum layer 2?
Yeah, so with Ethereum layer 2, in the perfect world, you could build basically a Nasdaq that settles to Ethereum. And what settling means is it submits its data to Ethereum. So you have to pay for the Ethereum cost to submit that data, right? If you're really building a layer 2 that gets any advantages from this idea of Ethereum settlement, you have to submit the data there. And that those costs are very high right now and are unlikely to be competitive within the next 5 years based on dank sharding and all these design parameters that they picked. So that's the problem. And two, your sequencer, or the thing that encodes transactions, is going to be centralized unless you basically rebuild Solana. And if you rebuild Solana, like, what's the point? Just go use Solana. Like, it's already done.
Okay.
Actually, let me just share a little bit here, right? From a actually builder perspective, right?
Yes.
From actually a practical perspective, right? It's like, I feel like the conversation of Binance and Nasdaq really misses one really important point, right? That Nasdaq is one market, Binance is one market, right? And you really don't want that, right? You really want the ability for anyone to spin out the markets. Singapore, you should have a stock market in Singapore, you should have a stock market in Africa, you have a stock market anywhere, right? And someone should be able to execute a trade that goes through all these markets at once atomically, right? Someone should be able to arbitrage across a Latin American market, Singapore market, Africa market, all at once, instantly, right? Arbitraging across all that, right? I feel like we talk about centralized exchanges, but we kind of miss the point, which is like there's this really massive advantage of decentralized systems, right? There's that they can all be in one place and aggregate across there's no way ever in the world, right? You ever be able to do a Nasdaq, Singapore Stock Exchange, or never. So just real quick here is that I think, for example, right, it's like people ask me, do you think the liquidity will ever overtake centralized exchanges, right? And then the answer is simple. It's like if you're talking about any single AMM, no, right? But as a whole ecosystem, right, will we have enough liquidity to overtake Binance? Will we have enough markets or innovation to kind of create like new stock systems? Yeah, we can. No problem over time. I feel like that's actually one massive advantage of like decentralized systems that I think we tend to not talk about when we do this comparison, Yeah.
Well, I think Jupiter did about 3.5 billion in trading volume last month, right?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
So that's some signal there as it is.
The whole point here is this, right? I think to Tony's point is that like the biggest difference, right, between add on to the same point what Tony was saying earlier, right, is that when you spin up more L2s, right? Now, each L2 is gonna have their own set of markets, own set of apps, right? Now, and fundamentally, that's a very big constraint. Means that it doesn't matter how good a technology in one particular L2 is, right? You're still gonna have like all these markets that being spread out across different blockchains, right? What this also means, right, is that you can never really kind of like have the same kind of like a composability or market synergy, right, as you have everything on blockchain, right? So I think that's actually one major reason why I don't think the future of finance can be on L2s.
The way you could argue this is that, Ethereum Layer 2s are essentially creating their own localized fee markets, right, on the Layer 2s.
There's a very big difference between that kind of localization versus what happens on Solana. They're creating their own isolated environments between Layer 2s, but each one is generic and cannot handle an NFT mint and like a DeFi liquidation at the same time.
Got it. Tarun had a talk recently about dimensionality of fees. And I know you and the research team has been working on the adding priority fees to Solana, which I think has helped scale. And you mentioned this concept earlier, which is like database hotspots, right? Wherever there's hotspots in certain programs, then what you can do is you can create like arbitrary buckets of units where certain amount of transactions can get hit. And then after that, transactions would have to wait for the next block. So could you explain a bit more about the dimensionality of gas fees, priority fees,
For sure,
and how this is going to help Solana scale over time with more apps running on Solana in itself?
Can we also use words that the average person understands?
Yeah.
The words not like dimensionality.
Can I make one comment about the previous topic?
Yes.
What is so like fundamentally different about the layer 2 thing is that like when you have like 1,000 layer 2s,
Yes.
they're all separate little environments that are asynchronous from each other. It's very, very hard to have a guarantee that everything happens at the same time across all of them. And this is why like it's beautiful when you like do a 20-cent trade through Jupiter, like literally 20 cents. It'll hit 4 different markets and trade them all to give you the best optimal price. It's like literally at the airport, if you went to 4 different currency exchangers and be like, have 20 cents, give me the optimal price. Like they would laugh at you, right? Because the work to do that and to like, they'll give you a flat fee for each one of those trades. So like, it's impossible to actually scale it down. And this really demonstrates the sand in the gears between these asynchronous environments that all have to synchronize at different times. And each synchronization costs a fee and has to settle, and like the transfers all pay a fee. And it's very, very hard to hide it. Like people will build systems where like they'll give you virtual prices and then that's settle in the background and try to optimize and create efficiencies there. But they will all carry risk and they will all be slow and will all be more expensive than here's like literally I'm checking 5 different marketplaces around the world, but all in one computer. And the cost to check as many of them as you want is the cost of moving electrons in one machine.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like The science fiction magic that we want to create at Solana is that like one giant computer where like everything is all in one chunk of RAM. Like the entire financial system is all loaded in one RAM. Like, and it's all possible, right? If you can dream it, you can do it.
I know you're going to move on, but I really want to talk about this for being because
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this.
no, it's really important. Like this whole L2 thing is really important because I don't think people get it. And it's like when your applications are spread up. Okay, think about it this way, right? It's like when the utility and utilization, right, and use case on Solana, right, increases over time, right? Why? Because it's one blockchain, right? Because like something like Jupiter, right, the more you get more markets to spin up, right? More tokens is all one blockchain. We bridge tokens from Ethereum to Solana is one blockchain, right? So it becomes more and more useful over time, right? And not just that, the UX, right, the usability is the same, right? And like no matter regardless of whether there are 1,000 markers or 10,000 markers, you can always transact across them, right? You know, in one transaction, right? Now, contrast that to the L2s, right? Now, when the popular apps are broken up, right, between different L2s, right, you can't compose. The UX actually goes down, but you can't compose across them, right? It's like imagine if you go from say Google to Facebook, right? You need to change your internet, right? That'll be pretty awkward, right? You know, right?
The counter argument, like the Ethereum researcher is going to say is, well, you know, like over time that'll be solved, right? You know, you have bridges as an example. I'm just giving their counter argument.
I'm saying that they will be solved. I'm not kidding. I know
sequencers, you have generalized sequencers that can sequence different chains. I'm just putting out their counterpoints as well.
I'll give you my counterpoint, and it's none of that technical stuff. My counterpoint is composability might be overrated.
Oh, wow.
Is composability really important? And so far, among the DeFi applications, I haven't seen much of composability yet.
Correct. Qiao, let me push back really strongly on that. Okay?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Now, it really triggers me. Okay, so let me just push on that. All right. The reason it doesn't matter is because we are creating all these islands of like Ponzi's. Sorry. Okay, but we. I'm sorry because we have to move past this. We have to move past like this very cynical view that we create blockchains and all we do is like replicate the existing infra and then mint coins and call it a day. No, I'm not here to do this. I'm here to kind of like, you know, we are here to broaden the use case, right? Now, the reason why composability is overrated is very simple. Okay? Now, it's because people don't care. People just want new AMMs, new tokens and farm it and they move on, right? But if we really care about like moving the state forward, right? Now, if we really care about building a global financial system that everyone can use, right? And then if you really care about having a system where like 2 billion people can all use at the same time, right? Across different markets and use cases and remittances, everything, right? Visa, if you really care about the whole Visa promise, then no, then composability is not overrated. It's extremely important. But if you only care about creating isolated environments, right? Whereby, you know, we can mint new coins, then composability overrated. I guess it really goes to what we care about. And the reason for us at Jupiter, right? I mean, if you look at all the things you're building, right? Whether it is the aggregation or Jupiter Start, right? Or where Jupiter Start or the perps thing, right? Or the whole entire product stack. It's all because like we believe in it, right? We believe that, okay, there's going to be more and more projects on Solana, right? There's going to be more and more systems, right? And we want to kind of bring them all together and make the whole ecosystem and the whole experience much better, right? So I think it really depends on where we come from, right? Do we want to have an ecosystem whereby, okay, we are very happy to spin up a server and call it L2 and then create coins? Or do you want to actually like make things more useful? I think it's actually a very pivotal point for our industry.
Let me play devil's advocate. Again, like I'm not saying composability is overrated. I'm just playing devil's advocate. What is, in your opinion, the most important application of composability? Something that needs 2 applications on a single board computer to compose with each other. What's the most important application that you can think of?
I think the idea of like Visa, or I think everything we talked about earlier, right? I think Jupiter is very good. Like, I think aggregators are a very good like specific example of composability.
Because you look for the best price across multiple marketplaces.
Jupiter is the clearest example that shows real financial benefit to consumers from composability. I would say is Jupiter's like the perfect example of that. Is because they will always pick you the best route regardless. And it's taking as many markets and aggregate and accounting for all the fees and everything else, minimizing the cost for the user in every transaction.
On this note, you and I talked about this observation that we made, which is that on Ethereum, the leading aggregator is not the most dominant user-facing application, right? On Ethereum, people use Uniswap rather than 1inch. But on Solana, people use the aggregator, which is Jupiter, rather than the underlying DEX, which is, for example, Orca. Like, there's a fundamental reason behind this. Can you explain to the audience why that's the case?
Yeah, it's actually very, very simple. It's like when things cost $10, people don't use it. Right? It's not very complicated. It's like, okay, at this point, I want to be very clear on something. Okay, I love Ethereum. Okay, I came from Ethereum world. I mean, Qiao and Imran knows me from way back. I'm sure Totally is very grateful to Ethereum as well. A lot of the standards that on Solana are based on Ethereum, right? So I think we are all like big fans of Ethereum. But at the same time, I think on the highlight a few things, right? It's like when things cost like $10 to run a transaction, right? When it costs $20 to test a DeFi application, right? Then people don't use it. That's it. Not complicated, right? So to do a complicated routing through Ethereum is very expensive. On Ethereum itself, to do a complicated routing, it will cost you like $30-$40, right? Or even $300. Now, if you go to L2, you don't have the density of markets available, right? To have a complicated program like Jupiter to make sense. But on Solana, it costs nothing. It literally won't cost you more, right? To route through like 20 different markets. And that's actually one big difference. And this actually parlays to a broader point about Ethereum versus Solana, right? It's that like on Ethereum, you can only do simple things, okay? Because on the main Ethereum chain itself, doing anything complicated is too expensive, right? On our tools, the applications are always getting too fragmented. So you wouldn't actually have the density of applications that you need to actually do complicated stuff, right? Now, but on Solana, those two things are not true. Okay, honestly, the first time we built Jupiter, and we did a 10-cent swap, right? It's not just markets, but tokens too, by the way, right? It's like routing through like many different tokens and markets, and like it cost us nothing. We're like, wow, holy shit. It was a really big moment for us, right? To see that screenshot of like that market, like, 0.0002 cents. I think that is actually the two reasons why. And number one is that like, it costs you nothing to do something that's fundamentally way more complicated and interesting. And the second reason is that like the number of markets available, right? And systems available on Solana is going to just grow exponentially over time, right? I'll just give an example, right? For example, there's this program called Sanctum on Solana, right? That does immediate liquid staking and unstaking, okay? That's actually huge because, like, for example, say you have a big order coming in, right? That you want to say sold to a stake sold, right? Now, Jupiter won't just find you AMM, right? Jupiter will find you, okay, so maybe say, okay, 20% goes through Orca and 30% goes through multiple hops, right? But okay, maybe your order is too big, right? It can't fit into AMMs. So you directly stick it into Solana through Sanctum and give you XO, right? So all these things happen. Like, so there's this really wide variety of like AMMs, CLOBs, staking programs that can all be done in a single transaction, right? Those are all things that you do have CLOBs on Ethereum. It's too expensive, right? You can't compose across like staking, CLOBs, and AMMs on Ethereum too. It's too expensive. So I think all these things are the reasons why I think there's way infinitely more things you can do. As a number of use cases come up.
So going back to maybe the rollups, we talked about how Ethereum is planning to scale through, maybe spinning out more rollups. That's their version of localized fee markets, as we discussed. Obviously, it's very different than how Solana thinks about it. So thinking more about how you're thinking about designing let's say the next version of Solana, you talked about a few things. One is priority fees. One is localized fees, dimensionality of fees. And if you want to kind of explain that term for our audience, I think that would be very helpful. Yep. And then thinking through what hotspots of programs you mean and how that scales over time.
The word dimensionality really hurts my brain.
It does.
I have PTSD from college physics course or something.
Yeah.
Like in physics, there's this thing called dimensionality, and it really hurts me.
We got to make it a lot easier for people to understand what's happening.
I'll try not to use the Laplace transform in this explanation. So like basically operating systems in the 90s, Linux included and Windows, if you remember Windows 95, they were single-threaded environments that could only run one application at a time. Even if you had like Windows, you could switch between. It was one app running at a time. And it took like literally a 10-year effort for Microsoft to switch to the NT kernel and ship Windows 2000. That was like the first desktop OS that was built on a modern kernel that could do multiple apps. And the reason why they had to do that is because cores stopped getting faster by frequency and they started growing wider by core counts. And you got 2 core systems by the end of the 90s, but then it rapidly just started doubling every 2 years. You basically just started adding hyperthreads on cores instead of adding frequency. So no one talks about frequency scaling at all anymore. In CPUs, it's all about like how many hyperthreads you can support. And you can literally buy a box now with 1,000 hyperthreads. But the OS and the software has to support it, and it has to support it in a way that it's efficient to run a single box with multiple applications on it versus buying a bunch of different boxes and running one app at a time. And if your software sucks, it's actually not efficient to all run it in one.
Yeah.
Like, because they will do denial of service on each other, right? One service is getting hit with a bunch of stuff, and all of a sudden your machine freezes and takes up too much RAM and all the shit and kicks out all the other applications. So this is a massive engineering challenge to build an OS that's truly like multi-application and scales in this like nice elastic way to where you add hardware and more apps work and the apps can't kill each other. It's hard to do it in like a permission environment where you control everything. We have to do it in a permissionless environment where we don't control the hardware or anything, right? Like we're just built the protocol that allows that to happen. And this is the really hard challenge. And Ethereum is going the other way where they're literally like, well, for whatever reason, we don't want to take that path. What we want to do is basically give everyone their own little box. And there's a protocol for them to communicate to each other through the ETH1 DA layer. And that's fine. But you're creating these like a totally different system where you have to have separate boxes. Each one of them basically runs one application in a single threaded way. It's very easy to reason about. The economics are very simple in each little box. And then they all kind of compete for the DA layer. And that's fairly easy to reason about as well. This has to work not only at the compute, like threads and like all this memory and all this other stuff, actually has to work with fees and economics too now. Because the problem that happens in that single threaded mempool environment is that you have like a NFT mint, a meme coin, and a liquidation all happening at the same time. Each one of those has like an economic value to the user. And they're different users, different applications, but there's like, they'll price it, right? Like it's worth it for me to spend up to $100 in fees to get the ape coin airdrop now versus like wait 10 minutes. And that liquidation bot is like, hey, this liquidation's worth $50,000. It's really worth it for me, $49,000 in fees to make sure that I'm in the block now versus in 10 minutes because it's going to be gone. Right. So all of these different actors will bid up to get included in that first block, really in the first part of the block. And they're all fighting each other. And because it's a single threaded environment for execution, it's a single threaded environment for the mempool and everything else. They all bid to be to the top of the block, and you will bid up to your economic opportunity. And that creates this global fee spike that kind of what pushes the floor of to be included in the block up for everyone. And that's problematic because that means that you can't really have a NFT mint and DeFi in the same ecosystem because they will increase the fees for each other. That's like in operating system terms, it's as if I'm running like two apps, right? My browser, right? And the Slack thing that's in the background slows the fuck down of my computer, right? And I can't use it anymore. I am like,
this is what's happening on Ethereum right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, why is my operating system so bad that the Slack application that's in the background is causing my video to jitter, right? That's an operating system failure. So the way that we solve it on Solana is I wish we had this design from the start because it's brilliant, but we walked into it falling flat on our face. Basically, we saw a similar thing that you saw on Ethereum. You had an NFT mint and people really, really want this NFT mint more than anything else. And they spin up a whole bunch of servers and they all slam the network with transactions to be first in the mint. And that causes a whole bunch of queues and everything else to blow up in size. And they're processing all these duplicate messages. And like, the problem is like we can increase fees globally and that would work, but that would kill the whole point of having composable system with multiple applications. Because if one application increases fees for everyone, what you should do is then split the chain and run a different app in every chain to avoid that problem, right? Like you don't want your liquidations in the same application fee market as your NFT mint because you don't want the price for the NFT mint to have any impact on the price of payments and the price of DeFi trades or central limit order books. So if we couldn't figure out how to solve this, Solana was dead. It was kind of like an existential moment for the engineering team. But luckily, the way that the runtime works is that every transaction has to specify all the memory locations on chain that it's going to read and write. And this was done for performance reasons. Like we wanted to maximally parallelize the throughput of the runtime. And that means if we know all the information ahead of time, we can schedule everything in this like perfectly overlapping way and just execute like crazy. And that was awesome because The way that these hotspots occur is the classical database hotspot problem is everybody's writing to the same spot. All the NFT mints to create this mint, they're all writing to this one mint location. All the liquidation bots that are trying to hit the same market that is like being liquidated, they're all writing to the same spot that is implemented that liquidation. And there's no real way to like parallelize that information. Like you only have one spot that represents that one loan that's about to get liquidated. You only have one NFT mint. So that is kind of a classical old school database hotspot problem. In retrospect, I'm like, why didn't I think of this obviously like when we were building this? And the nice thing is that because the transaction has all the information for this, we don't have to actually execute anything. We can literally do this very, very dumb thing is you order all the transactions by the priority fee that they're paying, and then you start filling up the block, but you also keep track of the watermark of all the memory locations that they're writing to and how much work they're doing at each write. And as soon as a watermark hits the single threaded limit, which is roughly 1/4 of the block or 12 million CUs, anything else that touches that storage location, that watermark gets delayed to the next block. So you took all the highest paying things that touched at NFT Mint, you filled up 1/4 of the block with them, but then you also have 3/4 of the block left for all the other stuff. And it's very rare that you actually have two hotspots happening at the same time. At the same time, meaning here within 400 milliseconds of each other.
Yep.
Usually things, even if they happen at the same time, from a user's perspective, it's within 5 minutes of each other, but that's an eon for a computer, right? Like, so 4 is actually a lot. So you fill up the first hotspot, then you fill up everything else. So we really rarely see blocks being economically full. Blocks do get full, but that's because there's all sorts of like opportunistic arbs that will fire at the lowest price possible to be like, hey, if you include me and execute me, there's like 0.001% chance that I will be a profitable trade, but I don't even know. But include me just in case, right? And that's fine. Like people should submit that kind of stuff, but as soon as there's any economic reason to be ahead of that, they're trivial to outbid. So this is kind of like was an existential problem that if we didn't solve, the whole point of Solana would have been like moot. It would have been useless. And we did come up with a solution that's very unique to crypto, and it creates this multiple dimensional market for, use the word dimension, for not for like applications. It's not like DeFi versus NFTs versus something, but it is literally for like the current economic hotspot on chain. So it's very precise in how it separates these things. It's very dynamic. There's no control that we need to do. It happens automatically as markets move, as this information propagates. So kind of beautiful to see like priority fee spike because of DeFi, but all of Oracle stuff that doesn't touch that, or like all of Helium hotspot traffic happening without any impact. So
is this something Ethereum could adopt?
This is like requires a big pile of rework. You need to rework EVM to require access lists. Maybe it's possible without access lists, but by like pre-processing and generating them and signing them by the block producer. But like you have to kind of propagate this information all the way from the bottom to the top of the mempool, and then have the mempool run in multiple dimensions, which is a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Like the way that this would be like a huge undertaking, and will touch
I think that's
a lot
what Monad is working. Imran, I don't know if you've heard of them.
I haven't talked to Monad.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the Monad founder comes from Jump as well. So they know how the super low level optimization stuff works.
I believe they are not trying to force every developer to have an access list, and they're doing something similar to how like Move is doing its optimal parallelism. I don't know if any of those approaches are going to work. Like they're smart engineers, right? If they have an idea that it might work, there's a good chance that it might, but it's a lot of work to get the stuff tuned and working. And like, we'll see, right? Like all of these systems are going to be competing for developers, for user transactions and all this other stuff.
The other really big thing here is that we have to remember that EVM is built on a lot of previous standards, right? And built on system things, right? The whole accounting model on Solana and the whole ERC20 thing is completely different, right? The whole accounting model, everything is completely different and stuff. So it's actually not, so for someone Monad, right? It's not just about like the infra, right? I think the infra is one thing, but you also need to migrate the entire kind of like existing infrastructure, right? That's built on top of that, right? I think that's actually one challenge that I think people don't talk about, because in order to leverage that, because you can build the most parallel system underneath, right? But in order to leverage that parallel system, right? Everything from the UI to the way passing the transactions at the level all the way down needs to move as well. It's actually not really difficult. It's actually really difficult, right? So one of the things that we noticed when we first started building on Solana, right, is that it's actually very different, right? You have to actually, the whole thing looks nothing, right? Like how we build EVM, right? And I know a lot of people think that's a problem, right? But we saw it as a plus, because in the sense that, oh wow, someone is actually trying to do things fundamentally differently, right, to enable new capabilities, right? So I think that's actually one thing that we should take into account as well. It's not just the infra, but also the entire stack, right, that is built on top of that. Yeah.
So there is a parallel EVM, Neon, that's running on Solana that does take advantage of this. There is a limitation there, though, because they have to translate an Ethereum transaction into kind of like an event loop on Solana. And that translation is effectively single threaded, but they do basically hide all of the access list, all this stuff for you. So when Neon is submitting its Solana transactions into Solana, all that stuff is running in parallel and utilizing priority markets. And they can actually have multiple Neon events occurring in different Solana fees, even though they're all touching EVM instance.
This is a side comment, but I don't know if you guys see the same thing that I see, which is I feel like the DNA of Solana is very much more engineering focused, and the DNA of Ethereum is research academic. Vitaly is not an engineer. He dropped out of school, and then Gavin Wood coded the first version of Ethereum, but he's more of an academic than a engineer. I feel like these things have very long, big impacts down the road.
Ramifications.
Yeah, and I graduated Urbana-Champaign in 2003 and ended up at Qualcomm, and I was there for the next 13 years. And I literally saw every year phone hardware get twice as good. So it was moving faster than Moore's Law because consumer demand was so high. I had to code my software such that the next year I didn't have to rewrite it. So this was something that was ingrained into me. Okay, don't write software that sucks. Actually try to write it in a scalable way that effectively uses caches and all this other stuff as I'm anticipating hardware changes. Because I don't want to create extra work for myself. So I already in my experience as an engineer, I saw that really rapid Moore's Law effect on industry. This industry is no different. If crypto really became the heart of finance, Solana would get 1,000 times faster in a span of 6 years.
I think there is a fundamental question here, which is, in my mind, if the demand for block space outpaces Moore's Law, then at some point Solana layer 1 will be congested as well. Is that a fair statement?
You can literally have 2 boxes per validator. Right? If there's so much demand that people are oh man, we literally need 10 million transactions per second, you're talking about so much economic incentive that deploying this hardware is the smallest problem. It's the hardest problem is going to be building the software to make sure that all this stuff stays consistent and working. The cost of the hardware is zero in comparison.
So you don't think layer 2 will ever happen on Solana?
There's very little reason for it. And the reason why there's so much investment in layer 2 on Ethereum is because the cost of the L1 is so high that you can pitch to investors that our layer 2 is going to extract value somewhere between optimum cost, which is Solana, and Ethereum. And right, and on Solana, what are you going to pitch? Oh, this layer 2 is slightly faster. You can kind of people have hacked together layer 2 things. I would say Getcode uses a couple tricks to build very fast payments, notifications. You can do that for trading systems. So these are asynchronous systems that run on top of Solana, but they don't need proofs. They're literally just doing tricks to optimize the number of messages sent to the L1 and when they're sent. You can do all this stuff. It's very easy to build. A couple engineers can crank it out over a weekend without needing to go spend 18 months on layer 2 research and fraud proofs. And you get all the benefits that you could possibly have, but there's very little fee difference, there.
If that is SVM, right? Is it? PithNet?
Yeah, Pith is their own signers that wanted to do the push-pull model. It kind of makes sense for them to run an app chain. There are always going to be app chains because there is some commercial reason to run an app chain where you're effectively, it's a semi-permission system. You want semi-permission control over this and sovereignty. Go have a ball, like go fork Solana. It's the best app chain ever.
I think that answers the question, right? I think, for example, PithNet is actually a good example of what sort of L2, right? That makes sense for Solana, right? It's a very.
It's not an L2. You're not. There's no DA layer bridge. There's no fraud proofs. It's an app chain.
Like, it's an app chain, fine. It's an app chain. But it's kind of like an app chain that runs using SVM. What's L2? Come on, what's L2 anyway, right? It's a server or whatever. Sorry.
It's a server and a multi-sig.
Sorry. But just to conclude the point, I think it's really interesting because I haven't thought before. But I think a good example of app chains that run on SVM that fits data into Solana is like PithNet. So I think those make a lot of sense.
So my definition of an L2 is there's a data availability bridge between the two domains. And you can actually technically build that bridge between Ethereum and Solana. If Ethereum throughput is ever high enough, you can take all of Solana data, dump it on Ethereum and a Solana state root, and you can have the fraud proof and the whole thing. You can do the other way. You can actually make Ethereum a Solana L2 right now by taking all of the Ethereum blocks, which is not that much data, dumping it through Solana, and then having a protocol to do the fraud challenge and the Ethereum state root. So that would make Ethereum a Solana
L2. The fraud proof stuff in L2s, how is it coming along? Has it ever been done before? Like, has someone actually executed a successful fraud proof on optimism and actually worked out?
Not optimism. Arbitrum, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They've had it for a while so far.
It's still allow list only for submitting fraud proofs. It's still kind of permissioned fraud proof layer with a multi-sig that controls the bridge contract. So like what's frustrating about these systems is that the security of the system is the weakest link in the stack. If you're doing like analysis, right? Like, hey, look, I built you a hypervisor and this all the other stuff, but all the memory's open. You're like, no, that's the weak spot. Doesn't matter all the layers you built. So like all of these systems have an upgrade path for emergencies because they're so complex, and that complexity makes people worried, and that's rightly so, that they need a very fast upgrade path for that code. So they have a multi-sig to control it, and that's the weakest link. So if it is possible to construct that multi-sig in a secure way that is good enough for people to hold enough control over all the funds in that layer 2, then it is possible to construct it for a bridge. And the benefit for a bridge like Wormhole is that you're actually shrinking all the other code to a very, very simple observable system where you have deposit in, mint out. And actually the code base in Wormhole is much, much smaller, and the risk of hacks and all this other stuff goes down, and you can even make it provable. So in my mind, I think we're kind of like playing a lot of marketing games right now in the L2 space. I think I'm hopeful that some of these systems will get to a point where they can be frozen. And once they're there, then that could be cool. But right now it still feels pretty far away.
We talked a lot about the advantages on the infra side of Solana versus Ethereum. In terms of applications, there's got to be some only possible on Solana type of applications. What are you guys excited about that are only possible or Solana makes a lot better?
Yeah, payments is one that's obvious. Because of this localized fee markets, you can actually have payments in the same domain as DeFi. And this is really we haven't hit that point where that's important yet, but this is where I think composability will finally be oh yeah, it's obvious. But if you have payments in Ethereum or a layer 2 that experiences a fee spike, your fees for your day-to-day payment Visa processor go up. And they're what the fuck? I need to run my own L2 or my own app chain. That's an outcome that we want to avoid, and localized fee markets provide that. So you can have payments. Solana is fast enough to do in-person checkout, right? Because the expectation there for Visa is the whole transaction completes under 2.5 seconds. The P90 on Solana is 1.4 seconds or something like that usually. So 90% of transactions finish in 1.4 seconds or faster. So you can have this checkout experience, which is awesome. And obviously price is low enough to where I think it's like comparable to their internal infra at this point. There's a bunch of payments applications, mostly focused on cross-border remittance. If you look at like the stats for USDC, I think like something like crazy, like $80 billion worth of USDC is moved around this month, probably mostly because of DeFi. So like my hope is that like, I don't know if it's realistic or not, but like my hope is in the next 18 months, the stablecoin bill passes. Everyone and their mother issues a USD stablecoin, and you see this like massive competition to be like the global digital dollar that's used for like every niche that you can imagine a payments dollar being used for, not just competing in the US, but globally, right? And that creates that kind of massive demand for block space and the massive opportunity to like bring all these people on chain with wallets. And once you have 20, 30 million people that have dollars, right, in their wallets, the next thing is like, how do we offer them yield? How do we offer them DeFi services, all this other stuff? Then they plug in and you actually have commercial retail DeFi. That's my dream of how like we get to that next stage in crypto. I don't know how realistic it is, but like it feels like our US Congress people are just like sleeping on this like massive opportunity for the US financial system to really take over the rest of the world. Like,
by the way, here's an alpha for you guys, Ming and Anatoly. You're up against Tron in Latin America.
For sure.
And you're up against CeeLo in Africa.
MakerDAO. Also, DAI is also very popular.
DAI is pretty popular in Latin America, but Tron USDT is the dominant player there.
For sure.
I would just jump in real quick here, right? Is that when you have so many different tokens, right? Say you have, say, 30 variants of US dollars, right? And then you have like 20 variants of euros, right? And then you have the Singapore dollar, the Japanese yen, right? Because everyone's going to have their own stable coins, right? What you really, really, really need, right, for a Visa experience is that you need the ability to go from any variant of stable to any variant of token very, very easily, right? I think that's actually a really good example of what's possible on Solana, right? And also by Jupiter, right? Because on Jupiter, it doesn't matter how many markets there are. And because the whole payment thing, the whole swap payment transfer thing, divide the payment to a bunch of people, right? You know? And then all that happens like, again, like 1 second, 0.0002 cents, and it would not be affected, you know, if there's any big congestion going on somewhere else, right? These three things are actually really important criteria, right? The first being composability, right? The second being speed, right? And the third one being like reliability. The reason why I think this conversation is important, right, is because I think we have to adopt a much more expansive view of crypto, you know, whereby we really try to bring, like, not just create new blocks.
Grow the pie.
Yeah, precisely grow the pie, right? And really grow use case, right? These payment use cases, remittance use cases, and swapping use cases are really important. So I think anything that involves like the imagination of like, you know, replacing Visa, replacing Nasdaq, right? You know, I think all these things can only, so far from what I see so far, right? I think Solana is the best way to do this, you know? Yeah, so that's how I think about it.
Okay, wait, so Ming, you did an aggregator, Jupiter, and then you did the perps. Are we getting into payment now?
The way we think about it is this, right? It's like, okay, so do you mind if I switch topic for a while, real quick?
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so on Ethereum, right, there's a reason why every single application on Ethereum, right, goes multi-chain, right? Like, for example, whether you're Aave or 1inch or Uniswap or anyone, right, you go multi-chain. And actually, honestly, when we first started, everyone thought we were the same thing. Oh, they asked us when Ethereum, you know, when this, when Sui, when Aptos, right? Or first we didn't, right? You know, here's the reason why. Because on Ethereum, right, the economic incentives are for you to go multi-chain. You deploy a new chain, you get new users and new capital, your token pumps, everything, right? So your value is spread out, right? You spread out, you provide a thin value, and you spread it out across, like, you know, many different networks in the hope of growing your pie. Your incentive to grow a pie is not actually to be more useful. It's not. It's really not, right? The way you grow your own pie is that you just deploy across multiple things. Whereas on Solana, it's very different, right? The game becomes very different because we expect the number of users, number of use cases, number of tokens, number of markets to all grow in this one blockchain, right? And one ecosystem, right? So it will make sense for us, right, to like really provide deep value, you know, across and provide a really seamless experience, right, you know, across the whole stack on this blockchain. And what does that mean? It means that, okay, on things that we feel like it's good for us to have a UI, for example, perps, for example, a swap, for example, DCA, for example, limit order, we put them on UI, right? We also, but for things like payments and stuff, okay, we actually have a really great set of APIs, right? And everything, So every single major payment network on payment project on Solana uses Jupiter, right, to kind of process payments, right? So you can actually, pay in one thing and get something else. You can pay in Stammer coin and get received in USDC, right? And all that is practically free. The best Visa-like experience you can ever go. If I go to China, I pay with my Singapore or US credit card, right? That thing happens, right, in the background. The USD gets transferred to, renminbi, or whatever, right? So same thing. I think so for us at Jupiter, the way we think about it is simple, right? Number one, how do we provide deep value to a growing Solana pie? So again, this really goes back to the whole construct of the market. Again, the composability thing is really important. Because if you cannot compose across all different markets, right, and different users, then you can't do much. You can't actually provide one seamless UI. So, and then the second thing is that we do actually put in a lot of effort into our APIs and routing systems, right? And also and terminals to allow developers to easily use the thing. Yeah, so that's how I think about it. Yep. And one thing I would say is that we're also announcing Jupiter Start, which is a way to, because Jupiter is the most used program, right? So, and probably one of the most well-known things. So we are also having a really good community right now. So we also want to kind of like encourage our users to check out all these new applications and programs and DeFi apps and everything. So I think in essence, I think we want to grow the pie, right, in a number of ways through our products, through our APIs and our programs, and also through the ecosystem stuff as well. Mm-hmm.
So if you look at what's happening on Uniswap right now, right? Let's just say that Uniswap is your competitor on Ethereum.
Nah, I don't know. Okay.
Let's just make that stark difference, right? Like there's Uniswap and then there's Jupiter. Uniswap
Jupiter is a better Uniswap. That is
okay,
that's the narrative.
Yeah, that could be a great comparison, right?
People say that. We don't.
Let's say that Uniswap, the way that Uniswap is launching, they launch on different layer 2s. So they're on Arbitrum, they're on Optimism, and they're focusing on retail. They just launched Uniswap Wallet, and now they launched Uniswap X, which is the intent-based aggregator, right? I think recently they did about $1 billion in total trading volume since launch. And I think they launched about 2 months ago. So to me, what it seems like is Jupiter's biggest competition to me is Uniswap. They're taking a very fundamentally different approach because they're building on a different stack on Ethereum. And there's so many levels of complexity just based on our conversation today. So fast forwarding 2 years, where do you see this space going against Uniswap? Do you ever, foresee yourselves including Ethereum assets? Are you guys ever going to compete directly head on with Uniswap, etc.?
First of all, I love Uniswap. I think the whole Bangkok started the whole AMM thing. But I just want to reiterate that I really love everything Ethereum. Okay, I love the research culture. I love Uniswap. I love everything. Okay. At the same time, I do think that things in Ethereum are fundamentally limited, right? And this is a bold statement, okay? So let me share a little bit more, okay? It is because the mental complexity, right, of the transaction fees, going between L2s and doing so many things because things are expensive. It leads to a situation whereby you've really optimized for, and yes, volumes are very high, right? Everything, but you've really optimized for whales, not you. This is very big culture where we start to optimize for whales and to overcome the L2s and everything. So, I mean, I think that wouldn't work because you're doing all this extra work to try to kind of overcome the fundamental problem, which is like the fees too high. So the way I think about it is actually very simple. What's actually really, really important is to move the user experience as close to a SEX as possible. A few steps, right? Number one is how do we move the experience as close to, and when I mean experience, I don't just mean UI, right? I mean liquidity, I mean spread, I mean accessibility, everything, right? And it's a very singular focus, right? We don't try to do too many things, right? We want to have a very singular focus. How do we kind of like allow the experience to move as close to a SEX as possible? That's firstly, right? Now, the secondly is how do we encourage more and more assets, right, to come into Solana as possible? And there's a very, very simple reason why it happened. Very, very simple reason. You're going to see a lot more AMMs, a lot more markets, a lot more entrepreneurs, right? And we are seeing that today already. They're going to create like new AMMs and new markets on Solana. They're going to incentivize it, right? And they're going to bridge liquidity over. Thirdly is that obviously, because we don't just use our own liquidity, right? We kind of like we are able to use the liquidity across any market on Solana, right? To your point, I think Uniswap does many things and across many things across many chains, right? We are going to be a lot more focused, right? We are going to say, okay, you know what? We think that what's really important here is to bring in as much liquidity into Solana as possible, right? That's firstly. Secondly, make the ease of trading across any single market and single token, right, as easy as possible, right? So people go, wow, okay, this is actually the best way to do it. Why am I jumping between all these L2s? Or am I jumping between different things? We can do it here. And thirdly is to kind of like really build the entire provide the APIs and the SDKs and everything to make to make it super easy, right, to build payment use cases on top of Jupyter, right? Now, the last thing I'll say to that is that we are actually thinking through a multi-chain system that is focused on Solana, right? That will make trading across different chains on Solana much easier, right? But that is a project for next year. That is actually how I think things go. So in summary, right, like what world do we want, right? Do we want a world whereby like users, it's very easy for users, the cognitive load of coming to a network and using is very easy. And I think that's the world that we win, and that's the world of focus on. Yeah.
That's super helpful. To me, it seems like you're really going against Binance and offering the entire suite of experiences. That's what it seems like.
Why not? I mean, I really feel like the space, and that's why I love Qiao, right? And Imran, right? Because I feel like you guys have always been like on the optimistic side of crypto, right? I feel like there's so... Hey, Qiao, say something.
No, I'm just on the realistic side. When people got super bearish on Solana, I wasn't particularly optimistic. I just saw in front of my eyes, there's these builders who really believe in Solana and continue to build. And that's always the most important leading indicator.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the things was like when Tenzer joined our batch 2 batches ago, probably 2 of the brightest engineers we've ever met. And we took them on into our batch, and they've just like iterated on their product so much so that within 3 months they were able to overtake Magic Eden in terms of trading volume. And I think that goes back to the DNA that Anatoly we've talked about a little bit earlier, which is like when you bring in this like engineer focus or engineer first DNA into a layer 1, that could enable those types of developers to be attracted to that type of ecosystem. Whereas like if you look at Ethereum, it's more research focused, more experimental. And I think, Qiao, you mentioned 2 pods ago that, Ethereum could be the canary chain for Solana. Yes. Not quoting you exactly, but
the test bed for Solana.
Yeah. So there's some interesting elements that are playing out. We're starting to see now, which is even like if you think about Jupyter, right? We haven't seen a Jupyter-like experience on Ethereum, because what happened with Ethereum is that with Ethereum, people are starting with one product, right? So lending. Aave launched a lending protocol 4 years ago. And now more recently, they're launching other types of markets, right? So let's say stablecoin, they launch their own stablecoin, they have their own wallet, etc. It's like they're more in the process of bundling throughout these years. Whereas I think with Solana, people are doing this at first, right? So like with Jupyter launching a year or 2 years ago, now you have perps, now you have other products that are automatically being bundled together. So I feel like there's a lot of learnings that we've learned from Ethereum now is being instituted on Solana.
Actually, just now you made a point earlier about our competitor being Binance, right? And or Nasdaq, right? So I feel like that's actually the right framing, right? So I really don't think of us as competing against Ethereum. I really don't, because I feel like ultimately, like whatever we say, I'm very sincere about this. I think the whole point of what we're doing here is to grow the decentralized pie. Let me share with you guys why I think it's very important. Okay, now because when liquidity, right, is locked up in centralized venues, right, it's useless. It doesn't get used, right? You can't use it to use lending. You can't use it to do payment. You can't do remittances. You can't do anything, right? And then it's a very big problem. When you have all this, when the vast majority of capital, right, is not used in wallets, but it's used in sectors, right? It's practically useless. We don't grow the pie. We don't make things more useful, right? And then we are forever stuck in playing like, the trading game, versus being more useful, which is actually where value is created, right? So I think that's actually one very important thing for us. How do we actually make the experience much better, right, in terms of spread, UX, and everything, so that people have no reason to use the SEX, right? And then when they have no reason to use the SEX, they use them in Jupyter, right? The capital becomes much more useful. They go to buy other projects, they go to use payments and everything. That's actually one of the philosophical reasons, right? Why we see the moral imperative, right, as replacing, not replacing Ethereum, right? Not Uniswap, but around like Binance, right? Or any centralized exchange. The second thing that's actually really interesting is that if you think about the listing process, right, in Nasdaq, right, you have all these highly fragmented, highly opaque, highly controlled, right, listing venues. That's really bad for innovation, right? What you really want is that you want some kind of framework that anyone, anywhere in Africa, or some Nepal, right, can easily go to the global funding market and say, hey, I got something, fund me, right? And then their stuff becomes funded and then and becomes available global funding market, right? And I think that's actually the whole promise of like finance, right? To kind of like to liberate and to connect, right? So I feel like all those things can only be done in the promise of all those things. Don't get me wrong, it's actually going to be very difficult, right? To me, it's a 20-year process, right? But to me, these things are the promises of finance, and decentralized system. And I think for us at Jupiter, we don't see our goal as building Uniswap. People might say that, but we don't. We see our goal as how do we kind of move like decentralized economy forward? How do we move finance forward? Right? And how do we kind of reach a certain promise, right? Of these systems. Yeah. So that's how I think about it.
Anatoly, are you happy with where Solana is today?
I'm very competitive.
So that's a no. Okay.
Yeah, like I like being first.
It's funny.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm competitive by nature. I have like a glucose monitor and I don't want to have any spikes. I don't do it for any health reason. Like all my numbers are fine. It's just like once I have like a number to optimize for in the leaderboard, I want to be first if I'm good at that thing. So I don't know. I'm happy if I step back and kind of like take a breather. I'm beyond like happy, right? It's insane how much everyone has accomplished, and like folks like Jupiter and Jito and like Pith and everyone else that like kept building through the bear market and like actually like stuck with us and believed in the ecosystem and the technology. They like made all of this possible. And this last year has been like emotionally the hardest, but honestly, I would say like this breakpoint, I felt the same kind of happiness that I felt when the first seed check like hit the bank. It was all downhill from there.
That must have been the bottom.
Your message at the end of the MEV camp was so great. That was so great.
Yeah.
I don't remember what you shared at the end of it was so great. Yeah, I really loved it.
That first seed check when it hit the bank felt like awesome, and then it was all downhill and stressful from there. And like I think this breakpoint, finally seeing the ecosystem, everyone that's been building for like many years, really step up and take leadership and really kind of push it harder than I ever could. It's just been awesome to see.
What areas do you think Solana could improve on?
I have a list that I always publish on Twitter, like on the technology side that I want to see improved. It's optimizations. It's stuff that like asynchronous execution, like we need dynamic base fees, we need dynamic storage fees, a bunch of stuff like this. It's all coming. Like the number one priority is getting FireDancer out because we need to eliminate that like single point of failure. And I feel like once FireDancer's out, I can stop calling it beta, even though it's not perfect. That would be a massive milestone. I think beyond that, like we really, really focused on new developers and startups, like really trying to find like that next Jupiter team or the next Tensor team, because I believe that like my experience working at a big tech company, they have innovation teams that touch all of these emerging technologies. None of them ever produce anything. It's very, very rare. You should still talk to them because whenever you do something happens, it might take off. But like vast majority of innovation is going to come from organic teams that are new and will build those next big companies. So like this is what we're focused on, is like every hackathon, every hacker house, like most of my like Zoom meetings are with like new founders. Like, hey, what are you building? Is this your first time raising? Like, do you need to practice your pitch, etc.? Like stuff like this.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at time. I want to thank you both for joining. Any final comments to the founders that are listening?
This is the best time to start a company. Like the best time was a year ago. Now like today is like the second best time. I didn't regret it. I think even a lot of people that have started and failed have thought that they failed upwards because of the experience that you get and the people that you meet, and kind of like just the whole process is awesome.
And those that are listening to our podcast for the Jupiter airdrop, any alpha for them? I hear you. I see you.
No, just saying that I love everyone. I'm sorry if I cannot design the airdrop exactly how you want, but we try really, really, really hard. So, just remember that I love you. Everyone who uses Jupiter. Yeah, whoever you are, I love you. And to everyone listening to this podcast, I just want to say that like Imran and Qiao are the best, by far the best, right? I really, really appreciate working with them. They have been really amazing throughout, like bear or bull, right? Throughout, consistent, always there. If you can, work with them, get funding from them, do it right now.
Oh, funny story I wanted to touch on was when you launched Matora. The Matora launch, you were competing with the brothers. What product did they have? What's the name of the product? Was it Stable Swap?
Saber.
Mercurial.
Sablier. Or is Mercurio, and it was, what was it? Sable, right?
Saber. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember they, like, within a matter of a week or two, they like 10x the volume of Mercurio. And I remember being on a call with you, Ming, and you were pissed. You're like, I need to build a better product. It's the same like competitiveness that Anatoly just talked about himself. Like every single day, Ming would call me and he would just like vent. How do I win? How do I win? How do I become the best? And then one day he called me in the middle of the night. He goes, I have an idea. I'm going to build an aggregator. Look where we are now. Kudos to both of you. One, for building the engineering first ethos, because that really brings in the best developers and engineers into the space. And both of you for being so competitive, because have to be competitive in this type of space to win.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Yeah, lots of learnings, especially with how Anatoly is thinking about scaling Solana. I thought that was a very interesting conversation, especially regarding the fees, localized fee markets, dimensionality, or whatever you want to use.
For those with econ background, you can think of fee market or localized fee market as price discrimination. So some buyers in the market, you can offer them a lower price in order to get them to use the product. So that's how I think about localized fee market.
Or like metered or bandwidth, like really scaling through like bandwidth is another way to think about it. So essentially what I really found to be interesting is the fact that if you imagine Solana as a database and everybody wants to write on certain areas of the database at the same time, we call that hotspots, right? And those hotspots, you could actually create some sort of demand system, pricing system, where those that are trying to write on that transaction all at the same time are charged an additional fee. And everybody wants to compete to get into that block space first. And that creates this like homogeneous, like layer one, where the pricing can scale based on demand. That's how they're thinking about scaling, which is very different than Ethereum, because Ethereum, everyone's competing generalized compute, right? With the same state. And so now what you do is you spin up new rollups that will enable them to compete in those localized markets. I found that to be an interesting way to think about it.
Anything else?
I wasn't aware that most of the cross-border payments that are building on Solana is using Jupyter's API. I thought that was very interesting.
I think based on what I heard, what's happening is people can use any token on Solana to pay, including USDC, Sol, or any other ERC20 equivalent on Solana. And then they would use Jupyter. Once the payment is made, the recipient basically uses Jupyter to swap the payment token into a token that the recipient prefers to hold. And by the way, this is really interesting because, Imran, I don't know if you remember, back in 2017, 2018, I was debating with BTC Maxis on Twitter about what is the best form of money. And obviously, the BTC Maxi argument is BTC is the best form of money. Money should be a form of medium of exchange, store value, and unit of exchange. And I offered something that really triggered, I offered an idea that really triggered them, which is that any token can be a medium of exchange.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, I think this idea probably happens more on Solana now than on Ethereum, because that last mile of swapping the medium exchange token into a store value token that the recipient wants to hold is cheaper to do on Solana. On Ethereum, you don't do it. Like on Ethereum, you just pay each other in USDC. You never send me, let's say, Harry Potter Bombasonic, and then I use Uniswap to dump it into ETH programmatically, because the swapping itself is too expensive. I might as well just hold the shitcoin and then hope it 10x's. Well,
there's another interesting element just based on what you mentioned, which is the fee, the cost. The costs are so high, it's so expensive on Ethereum that there's certain behaviors that it disallows, which it enables on Solana. So an example of this is, and this is something that we've learned through our Tensor conversation, is that most of the NFTs a lot of the NFTs that are purchased on Tensor are actually from third world countries because of the fact that NFTs are so much cheaper.
Solana is the chain for the people. That is the new narrative.
And so you have that. Then you also have the ability for aggregators to take advantage and become the lead product over AMMs just because of the cost, right? The cost makes an aggregator much more effective than AMMs because the routing algos are able to run much more cheaply on Solana versus, let's say, an Ethereum. So yeah, I feel like a lot of new behavior that we're starting to see are emerging on Solana just based on the cost.
Yeah. Another example that they mention is payment, right? Payment simply by being cheaper on Solana, especially during times of high usage of the chain. When you make a payment on Ethereum and somewhere else, a big perpetual swap position is getting liquidated, the fee would be too high for you to make a payment. A payment shouldn't cost like $50. And so on Solana, by the way, with the localized fees, if there's a liquidation happening on, let's say, Jupiter's perpetual swap protocol, that liquidation wouldn't affect a USDC payment.
Yeah, I think that was really cool. Just thinking through, do you remember Black Thursday when everybody was getting liquidated on MakerDAO? And everyone that tried to save their loan, their CDP, couldn't because there's so many people in queue. Oracle was like mismatched. So like the price was coming in later, or there was a delay in both the Oracle and people waiting to like save their loan. And between the two, everyone got liquidated that was holding a CDP. I was just thinking through that moment because could that moment happen on Solana? And with this prioritized fee or dimensionality of fees, I feel like this would have been avoided. This could have been avoided.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to see that a lot of the learnings that we're seeing on Ethereum are being solved on Solana is the way I see it as of right now.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts?
I mean, overall, the thesis about Solana is still the same, which is cheaper, faster. And there's probably a critical mass of developers and on-chain activity and TVL so that whatever happens, Solana should survive. I mean, it's already gone through the worst.
Now, what was his name? Joe from Placeholder. He wrote an entire thesis on Solana and Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
He called Solana the iPhone and he called Ethereum the Android. I don't think that thesis holds, directly true, right? I mean, I think he was just trying to make a point so that people could understand what this is all about. But to me, it seems like we talked a lot about Ethereum negatively throughout the podcast, right? But I do think there is a world for both Ethereum and Solana. It's just going to look very different in terms of the types of apps that are being built on both of those ecosystems. And I think both of them can survive and do really, really well. And specifically, he talked about how Android is more modular. There's custom Android OSs that are built by different manufacturers for phones, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And he made that direct example with like layer 2s and Ethereum as an example. Whereas with iPhone and Solana, it's really vertically integrated, right? So Solana, the layer 1, it also owns the scaling. It also owns the validators and other first-party apps, but then also enables other founders to build on the layer 1. It offers this like very streamlined experience where developers can understand how to build in the ecosystem. Whereas with Ethereum ecosystem, you have to kind of learn the developer ecosystem, the sequencing, or et cetera. There's so many different things that you have to learn, which is much more modular in nature, but it enables a whole different tool set for founders to build in.
Yeah, it feels like Ethereum, thanks to the modularity, is potentially a better place for app chains because app chains would require more customizability and less competition with other apps for on-chain resources for block space.
Cool. So I think that's all. So, well, thanks for tuning in. Any final comments, Qiao?
This is probably our second last podcast of the year. I really look forward to our next one, the last podcast of the year, where we're going to, maybe go through the main events of the year and then summarize everything for you guys, talk about the main trends, and maybe some of our predictions for next year.
Cool. And we also have Sunny from Cosmos /
that's right.
Osmosis. So we'd love to learn more about the Cosmos's app chain thesis as well.
Actually, yes. So the app chain thesis on Ethereum will get tested by Cosmos.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Good Game. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.